In this video, we'll be talking about the PopLight feature of PopperVR. So the first thing we want to do, as always, is just head over to the wiki, and we'll take a look at the syntax of this method on the wiki page. So we'll scroll down to the bottom, or towards the bottom, and we'll see a lighting section. Now the first thing that we need to look at here is the fact that lights cannot be imported via GLB. So what does that mean, really? You can, in Blender, you can define lights all you like for your 3D models. However, they will not automatically work in Unity or PopperVR. So what Nailbuster has done is provided a method for this, a naming convention for this, that you can put on your lights, and that will translate into Unity lights, so that when you're in PopperVR, you'll be able to see things in your room. And you'll be able to use the nifty menu slider for making the lights brighter or darkening the room a little bit. So just like the other features that we've went through already, there is a naming convention for this, and it is PopLight. Now, after PopLight, you're going to have an underscore. You're going to have the type of light that you'd like this to be, and we'll look at the different types. And then the color of the light in hex value, and then an intensity value, and then an underscore 1. And this is really just to kind of compensate for the way Blender will name things so that PopperVR won't get confused by it. Intensity is a value between 100 and 9,999, but what you really need to do is divide by 100. So 100 divided by 100 would be an intensity of 1 in Unity. You can see an example here, PopLight underscore point, which is one of the types. And we show the types here, but you really only have 3 types. Area is not a usable type. Area cannot be dynamically created in Unity, so we need to stick with these 3 types. And I'll talk about that again in a moment. In the example, you see PopLight underscore point, that type of light, point, which is up here. And then an underscore, and then the hex value, all Fs, which is white. And then an underscore, and then the number 500, which was really divided by 100 to come up with this number, and then an underscore, and then that 1, and a trailing underscore, as we always need to do. For Blender person, I wanted to take a moment just to do a lighting comparison for you. So on the left here we have Blender light types. There's point, sun, spot, and area. Unity has point, direction, spot, and area. But you notice area I crossed out. And just like I mentioned before, an area light cannot be created dynamically. So that's really not usable by PopperVR. We will not be using that in the video. Point is the same thing, right? It translates directly from Blender to Unity. So you could use a point light you could add to your model. The sun in Blender is really translated to direction in Unity, and spot is the same sort of light as a spot in Blender is the same thing in Unity. Now, I should mention that you can create these different types, a point, a sun, a spot in Blender. It won't really matter. You could make them all points in your model, but it all comes down to the way you name the light itself in Blender. Because again, PopperVR is translating those names and creating those types of lights within Unity. So while you could use a point, or you could use a sun or a spot, and maybe you could do some sort of visualization in Blender to get an idea of what it might look like, the reality is none of that will matter when you publish your GLB into PopperVR. What really matters is that naming convention. So let's take a look at some of this. The first thing I wanted to show you was a room without a light defined. So it's just a dark room. I can go into the menu options. I can play with the slider, but we're really not going to get anything because, again, there are no lights defined in this room. Okay? Pretty straightforward. Now let's add a light. Okay, we're back in Blender, and I want to add a light. So I'm going to hit Shift A on my keyboard, and I'm going to come down to Light, and I'm going to just use a spotlight for right now. And it came out down there, but I'm gonna move it. So I'm gonna click on Move. Just gonna lift this up, and you can see now a spotlight is just like it would sound. It's you know, a light that's going to be at the beginning or at the top of it. It's at a point, and it just gets brighter as it shoots down onto whatever object you're showing it or pointing it at. So let's just take a moment to export this, and we'll take a look at it in VR. Okay, we're back in VR, and the room is still dark, even though we added that light. Well, we added that light in Blender, but we did not name that light appropriately. So PopperVR really has no idea about this light. So now let's go back and name the light correctly and see what it does. I wanted to show everyone the room with the light in VR named incorrectly so that you would see the fact that I can add lights into my room in Blender, but again, it means nothing to PopperVR or Unity. So we need to name it appropriately for these lights to work. So now let's set that up. Okay, we're going to name this Pop Light, and we're going to give it an underscore, and I'm going to make this a point light initially, and we're going to give it a hex code of white. And I'm going to use 080 as the intensity. I'm going to do an _1 as per the wiki, and then a trailing underscore. So let's take a look at that in VR. Okay, so now we're back in VR, and we can see right away that we have a bright light in here, and you can see it kind of radiating right up here on the ceiling. This is our point light. If I go in, and the point light value is turned all the way up right now, so if I soften this a little bit, let me go back, you see it's not as bright, but you can still kind of see where the brightest spot is for that. And of course we could turn it all the way off if we want. Go back, and we're back in a dark room. So you could play with that value in Blender and then come into PopperVR and play with the slider. I can tell you that for my purposes, I've found that 80 or 080, the value that I used, is something that I like, right? I feel comfortable with. I feel like it doesn't get too bright if we slide the slider all the way to the top. But you may find for your rooms, you can try different settings. The point light is probably the one I use the most, and it's because I'm not an expert in lighting, and it provides a nice clean wash through the room for me. So while I do use multiple lights, if you were going to just put one, then this certainly would be one to use, right? Because it would fill up your room. Now let's go back to Blender and play with the color of the light, and we'll also play with intensity and see how that affects the room. Okay, we're back in Blender, and I'm gonna change the hex code from all F's, which is white, to the hex code for a shade of red that I liked. So I'm gonna plug that in. And now let's go back to VR and see what that does to our. Okay, so here you see the light in the room has a red hue to it. Again, all I did was change the hex value of the color for the naming of the light, and now we have a red color. Pretty cool. Here's one more example of color. In this case, I used a blue hue, blue hex code in my example, and this actually might be a cool color for, say, an arcade, right? It just has a nice, to me, has a nice blue hue to it. I am going to change our light back to white, so I'm going to change the hex value back to white, and now let's play with intensity. So I've said before, I use 080 as a default intensity. For my room, that's what worked really well. I found if I put it much higher, it washed everything out. So let's just see with this room and the single light in here what this does. I'm going to bump it up to 800, and we'll see the effect it has in VR. Okay, look, 800 is way too bright. Now let me see if I mess with my slider in the menu option. Move it down. Okay, so at that level, it looks pretty normal. If I turn it completely off, is that off? There we go, completely off. Let's see what we get. Okay, so pretty dark. And if we go maybe here, so yeah, I mean, if I was to go all the way up, we'll just do it for a second. Wow. Yeah, way too much. So again, that's an example of how the intensity value can affect the lighting in your room. And you have that single slider here to adjust all the lights. So you might have different intensities on your different light objects that you define, but when you come into the menu, just remember you have a single slider to move them all up or down. So you kind of want them to be tuned in unison so that you get the level of brightness that you want for each light at a certain level, and then when you slide the slider up or down, they'll all move together. All right, so we're back in Blender. Let's change this to a spot light instead of point. Spot. And let's take a look at what this looks like in VR. Okay, we are back in VR, and our point light I changed to a spotlight. And look, we have this spotlight sort of spot on our wall. Now in Blender, I could have pointed that in any direction. That would translate, the object itself would translate in here in Unity. So you can do that. It just, like I mentioned before, it doesn't matter in Blender if you call it a, if you add a point or a spot or an area light in Blender, it really comes down to how you name it. Okay, we're back in Blender, so let's move this light to another location. Let's try over here. And let's see what that does. So we're back in VR, and now our spot is lower on the wall. So again, you're going to want to play with the positioning of the spotlight. If you're using a spotlight, maybe you want a spotlight on a poster or on an object on the floor or something like that. But just wanted to give you a little example of that. So now let's go back to Blender and we'll change the light again. Okay, we're back in Blender. And let's change the light to a direction light now, which is just DIR. DIR. There we go. So now, and I'm going to just move this back up a little bit higher. Come around. Yeah, it's in the middle of my room. All right, let's see what this looks like in VR. Okay, we're back in VR. Now the directional light, you can see, has more of a wash in the room. Let's just play with the slider a bit and see what it does. Turn it all the way up. Wow, that's really bright on that wall. And let's turn it a bit lower. See what that looks like. And look, we can see some artifacts in my wall. Clearly not a Blender expert, but you see you get more of a wash of light. So, I think that's closer, but I'd really like it to fill the room a little better. So let's try repositioning the light a little bit. Back to Blender. I'm going to try moving this. Let's see. I'm going to try moving it up above. And you can see kind of this ring of, how the light will hit this room. And if you notice now, we can see it a little better that, look, this is on an angle. That's why that wall back there was so bright. So let's fix that. Let's move this and let's rotate it a little bit. Actually, correction, I don't rotate that with that. I actually rotate it with this little dot on the lights. So I'll rotate it, I'll move it over, maybe I'll rotate it a little bit more top-down view. Let's spin around a little. Oh, look at that. I'm not even really over top the way that I thought I would be. So here we come like this, more of a traditional sort of top-down view for this. Okay, turn around, move it over my model. Yep, I think that's it. I think we have it. All right, let's go look at this in VR. All right, so we got a little bit better this time, right? We have a couple of walls. Now, I'm using a single light in this example. In your rooms and in my traditional room here, I used a combination of lights. But the point's the same, right? You would have multiple lights all named the way that you want to use them, using the type of light that you want to use, whether it's a point light, a spotlight, or a directional light. You'll be able to light all of the models and rooms that you create. Any object in PopperVR can be a light. So sure, you could bring a model in of a light bulb. I can make the poster be a light or any other object in the room, and it would just emanate light. So just something to think about to get creative with. In this video, I used a model room with a single light source to demonstrate the different light types and to help you understand how that light might translate from what you're used to in your normal Blender modeling versus what it will translate to in PopperVR. I should point out that in a normal circumstance, you'll likely have multiple lights in your room. Even my demo room that I've been using throughout the series had numerous lights defined in it. So again, I hope this was helpful in just walking you through a little bit of using the API and helping you kind of map the concepts across your Blender modeling and PopperVR. Thank you for watching the series of videos. The intent was always to help take what was written on the page in the wiki and make it real for you so that you can conceptualize what you'll need to do to create some neat and amazing rooms in PopperVR. As always, check the wiki, as that'll be the single source of truth for all the latest and greatest documentation and methods that get created. And if there are new things that get added, I'll always look to create those videos and add them to the playlist. Thanks again for watching.